Don't talk, just listen.
Don't talk, just listen. His voice cracked like gravel under rain, whispered against the terrified breath of a police officer. In the middle of a crowded street, a filthy homeless man held her still, one hand over her mouth, the other gripping her shoulder. Phones rose, laughter echoed. "Look at this! A homeless man grabbing a cop!" Someone shouted. The crowd jeered, their voices dripping with cruel amusement, but his eyes weren't wild. They were sharp, locked on the alley behind her. Sirens pulsed red and blue against the wet pavement, painting the scene in urgency. And in that instant, the line between madness and warning blurred. What looked like another act of public humiliation was about to expose a shocking truth, and the ending would leave everyone silent. Before we begin this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city you are watching, and don't forget to leave your like to keep following us. Rain stitched silver threads across a cold night in downtown Chicago. Steam rose from a subway grate, curling around neon signs that flickered like tired eyelids. Officer Megan Carter stood with her boots planted on the slick pavement, radio crackling at her shoulder, when the homeless man with a weather-bitten face stepped close enough for her to feel his breath. "Don't talk. Just listen," he said, voice low, eyes fixed past her. Phones lifted. Laughter slapped the air. A teenager in a varsity jacket shouted, "Yo, lady, you letting him touch a police officer?" More laughter. The scene tilted toward public humiliation, not the kind in textbooks, but the kind that smells like rain and cheap beer and stale judgment. Megan's hand hovered near her holster. "Sir, remove your—" His palm trembled as he released her sleeve. Then he pointed, two fingers stiff as a compass needle, toward a narrow alley spined with fire escapes. Beside him, a shepherd mix with a chewed blue-collar Buddy stood vibrating with a soft growl, paws shivering on the wet concrete. "He's there," the man whispered. "He's waiting for you." Megan's gaze cut to the alley. A dumpster overflowed with torn cardboard. A broken mirror leaned against a brick wall, catching a thin slice of the patrol lights, like a bad omen winking. Wind ferried the smell of old grease. She frowned. "Name?" "Thomas Reed," he said, swallowing. Water slit through his tangled hair. His coat was 2 sizes too big, the seams freckled with rain, but his eyes were sober, steady, not wild, determined. Behind them, a woman with an umbrella leaned to her friend. "Another vision from a street prophet. Wait till this goes viral." The crowd snickered again. Someone imitated sirens. It pressed on Megan's nerves like a thumb on a bruise. "What did you see, Thomas?" Megan asked, lowering her voice. Her fingers relaxed a fraction, but she stayed squared, trained, a police officer balancing instinct against protocol. Thomas didn't blink. "He watched you circle the block. Twice." He kept the blade under his jacket. "Left pocket." His throat bobbed. "If you call it in, he bolts. If you walk past, he steps out fast." "Why should I trust you?" Megan said. The question came out flatter than she intended. Buddy's growl stretched longer, a taut string about to snap. "Because you're the only one who didn't shove me this week," Thomas answered. A micro smile died at the corner of his mouth. He lifted both hands, open. "And because I don't want to watch someone bleed tonight." The wind pushed rain under Megan's collar. She swallowed the taste of metal that always came before a bad call. Her body kept inventory. Wet gloves, limited visibility, a restless onlooker crowd, a homeless man with dog and data that shouldn't exist. She scanned the alley again. Nothing moved, yet the air felt occupied. "Officer?" a spectator called, half teasing, half bored. "Maybe he's your guardian angel. Do a spin for us." More giggles, another knife twist of public humiliation. Megan ignored them and touched the radio. She didn't speak. Not yet. Thomas watched her thumb hover, then shook his head once, rain flicking from his lashes. "Please, don't announce. Not yet. He's listening." The word listening fused with the night. Buddy stepped forward, claws clicking. Thomas leaned slightly like a compass pulled by hidden metal. His whisper scraped her ear. 2 steps into the alley. You'll hear him slide. A siren shivered somewhere by the river. Megan's heartbeat drummed in her wrists. Shocking truth or street theater? She couldn't tell. But the dog's stare was a laser into the dark. and something about Thomas's stillness felt like a line drawn across a door. She took one breath, then another. "If you're wrong," she said, "this ends with cuffs." "If I'm wrong," Thomas breathed, "I'll apologize." He tipped his chin at the alley. "If I'm right, you'll live." The crowd's laughter thinned to murmurs, like a tide rolling back. Megan shifted her weight, rain ticking on her hat brim. She stepped toward the mouth of the alley, shoulders tight, flashlight low, pulse roaring. Buddy's growl deepened. Behind her, Thomas Reed closed his eyes and raised his hand, stopping her. As a faint metallic scrape cut through the rain, something slid in the dark. The scrape echoed faint but sharp, like a nail dragged across stone. Officer Megan Carter froze at the alley's mouth, her flashlight cutting a pale cone through dripping brick walls. Steam hissed from a rusted vent, blurring her view. Buddy, the dog, bristled and pressed forward with a low, guttural growl. Behind her, Thomas Reed stayed still, water running down his beard, eyes pinned to the shadow that stretched beyond the dumpster. He didn't blink. His hand trembled slightly, as though his body remembered every cold night on the street. The crowd, sensing something shift, quieted. Phones still recorded, but the laughter curdled into restless whispers. Megan's breath clouded the air inside her collar. Protocol screamed at her, "Call for backup, establish distance, secure the scene." But another instinct clawed beneath, an older, raw instinct that said wait. She tightened her grip on the flashlight, her other hand brushing the holster again. "Step back," she murmured to Thomas without looking at him. "No," he said, steady. "If he moves, Buddy reacts first. You'll have seconds." Her jaw tightened. Seconds. She hated relying on anyone outside the badge, much less a homeless man the city mocked 5 minutes ago. Still, the rhythm of the night was different now. The kind of rhythm that made seasoned officers trust the silence more than the noise. A teenage girl whispered too loud, "What's happening? Is she actually listening to him?" Her friend snorted, "She's stalling. He's a nobody." The words landed heavy, another sting of public humiliation. Megan straightened her back, shoulders squared, refusing to let the crowd's cruelty bend her judgment. "Why warn me, Thomas?" she asked, still scanning the darkness. His lips twitched, almost a bitter laugh. "Because once nobody warned me and I lost everything." His voice cracked, barely audible over the rain. "I swore if I ever saw the blade before it struck, I wouldn't stay silent again." Megan turned her head slightly, catching his profile in the dim patrol light. His expression wasn't madness. It was memory. Haunted, heavy, sharp with regret. Buddy's growl pitched higher. The dog's fur stood like wires. Thomas lifted one hand, palm open in warning. "Now, he's moving." Megan's flashlight swept across the alley wall. At first, nothing, just wet brick and shattered glass glittering. Then a figure flinched at the beam, pulling back. A glint of metal, unmistakable, flashed for an instant before melting into shadow again. Megan's pulse hammered. Her instincts screamed engage. Her training demanded she call it in. And the homeless man at her side muttered the words that bound the moment together. "You see it now, don't you?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Every choice stretched like a wire about to snap. The crowd behind her leaned forward, eager for spectacle, blind to the danger building inches away. Her fingers tightened around the radio mic, but she didn't press. She shifted her weight, angling her body toward the alley, voice low, almost a growl. "Show yourself." The shadows didn't obey. Silence pressed like a weight. Buddy barked once, sharp and explosive, the sound bouncing off the bricks. And then came the shuffle, fast, urgent, undeniable. Someone in the alley was moving toward her. The shuffle turned into a sprint. Out of the alley, a figure burst forward, coat flapping, shoes slapping against the wet ground. In his right hand, a blade glimmered, short, serrated, hungry for the first strike. Gasps ripped through the crowd. Phones shook as people tried to keep recording. The same voices that had mocked now cracked into panic. "He's got a knife," someone screamed, their laughter snapping into fear. Officer Megan Carter dropped her flashlight and drew her weapon in one fluid motion, sights locking on the shadow lunging at her. But hesitation choked her trigger finger. Too close, too fast, the wrong angle. If she fired, The blade might still find her before the bullet stopped him. Beside her, Buddy launched forward, teeth bared, barking like thunder. His paws splashed in puddles as he threw his body between Megan and the attacker. The homeless man, Thomas Reed, didn't hesitate either. He shoved Megan sideways with surprising force. Her shoulder hit the squad car as Thomas lunged at the knife-wielding stranger. For a heartbeat, the whole street froze. The knife arced, slicing the air where Megan's chest had been. It tore Thomas's coat instead, grazing his ribs. He grunted but held on, arms wrapping around the attacker's torso, the two men slamming into the wet pavement with a thud that cracked the silence. The crowd shrieked, stumbling back. Rain pounded harder, drumming on asphalt, drowning their disbelief. The shocking truth unraveled before their eyes. This wasn't a drunken street scene, wasn't a crazy man grabbing a cop. It was a setup for a killing, and the one person they mocked was the only barrier between life and death. "Drop it," Megan barked, weapon trained, breath ragged. Her voice thundered across the narrow street. The attacker thrashed, knife clutched tight, blade flashing dangerously near Thomas's throat. Thomas's arms strained, his face pressed into the mud, holding on with the strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Buddy snapped at the man's wrist, teeth missing by inches. Megan's finger squeezed against the trigger guard. Her training screamed shoot to stop. But Thomas's body was tangled with the attacker's, the risk unbearable. Sweat mixed with rain across her forehead. She adjusted, searching for any shot that wouldn't take Thomas too. "Officer, do it!" Thomas groaned through clenched teeth. The knife sliced close, tearing fabric, nicking his skin. Blood streaked down his side. Megan's vision tunneled, the world shrinking to the knife, the rain, the man fighting for her life. The crowd no longer mocked. They stood silent, horrified, recording the heroic act they never expected from a man they dismissed as worthless. And in that silence, the knife raised high, ready to strike. The knife arced down, its serrated edge glinting like lightning under the streetlight. Thomas Reed twisted his body, forcing the attacker's arm sideways. The blade grazed his shoulder instead of his chest, carving through wet fabric. He grunted in pain, but his grip didn't break. "Drop the weapon!" Officer Megan Carter shouted, her voice slicing through the storm. Her Glock stayed trained, every muscle coiled, waiting for the split second that wouldn't cost Thomas's life. Buddy lunged, teeth snapping, jaws clamping onto the attacker's wrist. The man screamed, stumbling, trying to shake the dog loose. The blade jerked dangerously close to Thomas's throat. The crowd erupted in chaos, shouts, screams, phones waving like frantic fireflies. What had started as public humiliation now spiraled into raw terror. No one laughed anymore. Their faces were pale, their voices trembling. "Shoot him already!" someone cried. "Don't! You'll hit the homeless man!" another shouted. The conflicting voices blurred, feeding Megan's pounding heart. Thomas locked eyes with her, his voice cracked, desperate yet calm. "Don't shoot. I've got him. Just get the cuffs." Rain poured harder, plastering his hair to his face, blood streaking down his arm. The homeless man who had been mocked moments ago now held her attacker at bay with nothing but grit and desperation. His chest heaved, muscles shaking under the strain, but his eyes, steel, unflinching, never wavered. Megan dropped low, closing the distance, cuffs ready in her left hand, gun steady in her right. The attacker thrashed, snarling curses, spittle flying. He slammed Thomas against the ground, trying to break free. The knife skidded dangerously close to Megan's knee. Buddy's growl deepened, tugging, refusing to release. The attacker screamed again as the dog's teeth clamped harder. The blade slipped, momentum faltering for just a moment. That was the window. Megan lunged, knee driving into the attacker's ribs, gun pressed close. "Drop it now!" she roared, her voice echoing off the alley walls. Her free hand snapped the cuff around his wrist, metal clicking shut over bone. The man thrashed wildly, knife still in hand, one arm cuffed to nothing. Thomas roared, forcing the man's other hand down, pressing his weight with everything left in him. Another sharp click. The second cuff locked. The knife clattered to the ground, spinning once before landing blade up in the puddle. The street fell into stunned silence. Only the rain and ragged breaths filled the air. Megan rose slowly, weapon still trained, chest rising and falling with adrenaline. Thomas collapsed back onto the wet pavement, mud smeared across his face, his body trembling from both exhaustion and pain. The crowd, phones lowered now, watched in complete stillness. No more laughter, no more jeers. Just the undeniable, shocking truth. The man they had mocked had just saved a police officer's life. Buddy stood guard over Thomas, teeth bared, chest heaving as if daring anyone else to challenge them. And Megan, breathing hard, whispered words the crowd barely heard. "You could have died." Thomas looked up, eyes glassy but steady. "Better me than you." Rain hammered harder, soaking the pavement until every step splashed, every movement echoed. The cuffs rattled against the attacker's wrists as he twisted violently, refusing surrender. His shoulder slammed into Officer Megan Carter's leg, nearly toppling her. "Stay down!" she barked, pressing her weight to keep him pinned. But the man bucked, snarling like an animal, mud streaking his face. His cuffed hands still reached, clawing for the knife that shimmered inches away in a puddle. Thomas Reed saw it. His ribs ached, blood leaking warm beneath his torn coat. Yet he lunged again, tackling the attacker's arms, forcing them back into the concrete. Their bodies wrestled in the mud, rain mixing with sweat and blood until it all looked the same. The homeless man, dismissed as nothing moments earlier, now fought with the ferocity of someone carrying the weight of every broken night behind him. Buddy barked furiously, circling, snapping at the man's ankles. The animal's loyalty pulsed like a drumbeat, each bite attempt carving fear into the attacker's eyes. The crowd staggered backward, pressed against the storefronts, umbrellas trembling in their hands. No one filmed anymore. They couldn't. What unfolded was too raw, too visceral, a fight stripped of spectacle, revealing only survival. Megan tried to wedge her body in, shouting commands, but the men rolled, Thomas gritting his teeth, refusing to let the knife wielder gain leverage. The blade's handle glimmered inches from his fingertips. "Don't let him..." Megan's words caught in her throat. With a guttural yell, Thomas shifted, pinning the attacker's wrist under his knee. His body trembled with effort, mud plastering his face, blood streaking his temple. The attacker thrashed, but Thomas didn't relent. His arms shook violently, yet he forced the man's face into the puddle until he gagged and coughed. Megan seized the opening. She snatched the knife, kicking it away with her boot until it skidded out of reach. Then with precision she wrenched the cuffs tighter, locking the man's wrists together fully. The metallic snap rang like a bell, cutting through the chaos. The fight deflated. The attacker's body went slack, breath ragged, curses spilling weakly. Thomas slumped back, chest heaving, his soaked coat clinging to his skin. Buddy pressed against him, whining as if urging him to stay conscious. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. The onlookers, once laughing, mocking, filming, now stood in reverent quiet. No words, no laughter. Just the echo of what they had witnessed, a heroic act no one expected from the man they had ridiculed. Megan crouched beside Thomas, her voice low, urgent. "You're bleeding." Thomas shook his head faintly, spitting rainwater from his lips. "Doesn't matter." His chest rose and fell like a collapsing wall. He looked at her with a strange calm. "At least you're safe." The words cut deeper than the knife could. Megan felt her throat tighten, a wave of guilt pressing in. She had doubted him. Worse, she had almost joined the crowd in dismissing him. For the first time that night, she saw him not as a homeless man, not as a stranger, but as someone who chose to risk everything for her. And the crowd, witnessing it all, remained silent, silence heavier than thunder, a silence that made every spectator confront their own cruelty. The attacker lay face down, cuffed and groaning, his cheek pressed into the muddy pavement. Rainwater pooled around him, washing streaks of grime and blood into the gutter. The fight was over, but the silence that followed was unbearable. The crowd that had once mocked now stood frozen, their umbrellas sagging, phones lowered, screens dimming in trembling hands. Their laughter was gone, swallowed by the sound of storm and labored breathing. What had started as a spectacle of public humiliation ended with an unshakable truth burned into their eyes. The man they ridiculed was the only reason a police officer was still alive. Officer Megan Carter kept her gun trained on the subdued attacker, chest rising and falling like she'd just sprinted miles. Every nerve screamed to stay alert, but her eyes drifted to the man kneeling in the mud. Thomas Reed leaned on one hand, his other clutching his side where blood seeped through his coat. His face was pale, lips trembling, rain streaking with red across his jaw. Buddy pressed against him, whining softly, refusing to leave his side. "You could have died," Megan whispered, more to herself than to him. Thomas coughed, shaking his head. His voice was a rasp, yet steady. "So could you." Those words lingered in the air like smoke, silencing even the raindrops. Megan's throat tightened. She had doubted him, nearly dismissed him, and yet he had thrown himself between her and death without hesitation. No badge, no duty, just choice, just courage. The crowd shifted uneasily. A woman in a red raincoat lowered her umbrella, her voice breaking as she muttered, "God, he saved her." Another man, who had laughed the loudest earlier, dropped his phone into his pocket and stared at the ground, shame painted across his face. The shocking truth was undeniable. This was no crazy drifter, no drunk wanderer causing chaos. This was a man who had given everything in a moment when no one else moved. Megan holstered her weapon and knelt beside Thomas. Her gloved hand touched his shoulder gently. "You need a hospital." Thomas shook his head again, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "No hospitals. No news. Just let me go after this." His eyes glimmered with something she couldn't name. Fear, pride, and a strange kind of peace. "But you saved me," Megan said, almost pleading. "People need to know." He cut her off with a slow shake of the head. "No, they'll just forget tomorrow. Let me be." His words stung because they were true. The same crowd that now stared in guilty silence would go home, dry their coats, and bury the night beneath tomorrow's noise. And yet, standing in the storm, Megan Carter knew this moment would never leave her. The attacker groaned, trying to roll over, but Buddy growled, low and protective, forcing him still. Megan rose and placed her boot on the man's back, pinning him firmly, her eyes never leaving Thomas. A man the city had ignored, mocked, discarded. He had written himself into her life forever. And the silence of the street said it all. The patrol car's lights pulsed red and blue across the slick buildings, casting long shadows over the street. The siren had gone quiet, yet the storm carried its own music. Rain on rooftops, water rushing into drains, the distant hum of traffic unaware of what had unfolded here. Officer Megan Carter stood over the cuffed attacker, waiting for backup, but her eyes kept drifting to the figure crouched in the mud. Thomas Reed sat slumped against the wall, his coat dark with blood, his breathing shallow but steady. His dog Buddy leaned against him like a second spine, pressing warmth into the broken frame of his master. The crowd lingered, restless. Some whispered, some stared, but none dared laugh anymore. What began as public humiliation had transformed into something no one could explain, a raw, undeniable act of sacrifice. Megan approached slowly, kneeling at Thomas's side. "You need medical attention," she said again, her voice firm yet softened by something deeper. Thomas gave a faint, tired smile. "I've had worse. Nights colder than this. Fights meaner than him." He tilted his head toward the subdued attacker. This is nothing." She studied his face. Beneath the dirt and tangled beard, she saw more than exhaustion. There was a strange dignity, the kind that isn't worn on uniforms or polished with medals. It was the kind born from scars, ones you can't see. "Why risk it?" she asked quietly. "You don't know me. You had no reason to—" Thomas interrupted, his voice low, threaded with memories. "I had every reason." His eyes didn't meet hers at first, fixed instead on the rain-slicked street. "A long time ago, someone needed me, and I wasn't there. I was too drunk, too blind, too selfish. They died because I wasn't who I should have been." He swallowed hard, jaw trembling. "I swore if I ever had a chance to do right again, I would, no matter the cost." Megan's chest tightened. The words carried more weight than the storm. This wasn't just about tonight. It was about redemption, about clawing back from a past that had already burned him to ashes. She placed a hand gently on his arm. "Tonight, you did more than right. You saved a life." Thomas finally looked at her. His eyes, though tired, burned with fragile light. "Maybe now I can sleep." The simplicity of it struck her harder than the fight itself. Sleep, peace, the things most people take for granted, yet for him were luxuries. Behind them, the attacker groaned, the cuffs clinking as he shifted, but no one in the crowd moved to help him. Their eyes stayed fixed on Thomas, the man they'd mocked, dismissed, ignored. For the first time in years, he wasn't invisible. The silence stretched until a siren wailed closer, backup units weaving through the wet streets. Blue strobes flickered against the rain-soaked glass as the moment drew to its inevitable end. Megan straightened, but her gaze never left Thomas. "When they get here," she said softly, "I'll tell them everything. Exactly who saved me." Thomas shook his head weakly. "Don't. Let me stay a ghost. People forget faster that way." But Megan's jaw set. She had already decided. The second patrol car screeched to a halt, lights flashing like fractured lightning against the rain. Two officers spilled out, weapons raised, scanning the scene. Their boots splashed in shallow puddles as they approached. "Carter, report!" one shouted. Officer Megan Carter straightened, her uniform clinging to her skin, hair plastered to her face. She gestured to the subdued attacker face down in the mud. "Suspect armed with a knife, attempted assault. He's in custody." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to the figure slumped against the wall. The other officer frowned, glancing at Thomas Reed. And him? Was he part of it? Megan's jaw tightened. For a split second, she saw the choice before her: leave Thomas as an anonymous bystander, or tell the shocking truth that no one expected. She took a step closer, her boots crunching over broken glass. "No," she said firmly, voice cutting through the storm. "He saved my life." The backup officers exchanged looks. One bent to examine the cuffs on the attacker, the other scanned the shaken crowd. But Megan's words hung heavier than any radio call. The homeless man, soaked, bleeding, trembling, was the reason she still stood. The crowd shifted uneasily. Someone whispered, "She admitted it. He saved her." A few nodded, shame and awe mixing on their faces. The same hands that had once held up phones now hung limp at their sides, no longer eager to record. Thomas tried to wave it off, coughing. Don't make a scene." Megan crouched beside him, her voice low but fierce. "You don't get to disappear, not after this, not after what you did." Buddy pressed his head against Thomas's chest, ears back as if agreeing. The other officers hesitated, watching the strange tableau. One finally asked, "What do you want us to do with him?" Megan's answer came without pause. "Treat him with respect." Her eyes locked with theirs, unflinching. "Because tonight, he's the only reason I'm alive." The weight of her words settled over the street. For the first time, Thomas wasn't just a shadow in the city. He was seen, acknowledged. And yet, his face carried no pride, only exhaustion. "Don't put my name in reports," he murmured, voice faint. "Don't turn me into a story, just let me go back to nothing." But Megan shook her head, her eyes fierce. "Not nothing, not anymore." The attacker groaned under the weight of the officers dragging him up. The cuffs clinked, metal biting into his wrists. No one looked at him. Every eye, every thought, was fixed on Thomas Reed, the man who had given everything without asking for anything in return. For the first time, the silence of the street carried not shame but respect. Rain thinned into a mist, but the street still glistened like black glass under the pulsing lights. The attacker was shoved into the back of the patrol car, curses muffled by the slam of the door. The backup officers busied themselves with reports, radios crackling, paperwork already beginning to erase the chaos into official language. But Megan Carter stayed apart, kneeling beside the man who had turned the night upside down. Thomas Reed leaned against the cold brick, his breaths shallow, his dog buddy curled protectively at his side. His hands shook, not from fear but from the sheer exhaustion of holding on when his body had nothing left to give. "You need paramedics," Megan said again, her voice low, stubborn. Thomas's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Told you. No hospitals. Just let me be, I'm not part of your world." "You saved my life," Megan countered, her eyes burning. "That makes you part of my world whether you like it or not." Thomas's gaze softened, shadows of old grief flickering in his eyes. He reached for Buddy's head, scratching the damp fur with trembling fingers. All I ever wanted was for someone to remember me kindly. Just once. Not as trash in the gutter. Not as a ghost people cross the street to avoid. Megan's throat tightened. She hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted her since the moment he grabbed her arm. "What's your name?" For a moment, he didn't answer. The silence stretched, heavy with the storm's fading hum. Then, in a voice almost swallowed by the rain, he said, "Thomas. Thomas Reed." The name hung fragile in the air, as if it hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Megan repeated it softly, like an oath. Thomas Reed. She wanted it to anchor in her memory, never lost, never discarded like the man himself. Thomas's eyes closed briefly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Thank you. That's enough." But Megan shook her head. "No, Thomas, it's not enough. You deserve more than being forgotten." Buddy whined, pressing closer as Thomas coughed, the sound wet and rough. Megan's heart clenched. She had seen countless victims, countless suspects, countless nameless faces on the streets, but never had one torn through her walls like this man. Behind them, the crowd began to scatter, slipping away into the night, their shame too heavy to carry. The phones were pocketed, the whispers fading. In the end, there would be no viral video, no headlines, just the memory burned into those who saw, and the silence that followed. Megan touched Thomas's hand briefly, firm, grounding. "You're not a ghost anymore." His lips curved faintly, eyes heavy but grateful. "Don't let them make me a hero, just remember my name." And with the rain softening into silence, she promised herself she always would. The storm finally broke, leaving only the hiss of water dripping from rooftops into the gutters. The street smelled of wet asphalt and iron, the chaos already dissolving into the city's endless hum. The backup officers loaded their gear, the suspect sat slumped in the patrol car. But none of it mattered. All that remained in Megan's world was the man sitting against the wall, his dog pressed close, his body trembling from exhaustion. She crouched in front of Thomas Reed, lowering her voice to a whisper that only he and Buddy could hear. "You changed everything tonight." Thomas shook his head faintly. "No, I just did what I should have done years ago." His eyes flickered with ghosts she couldn't see, but she felt the weight of them. "You call it nothing," Megan said, her throat tight. "But to me, it was everything." For a moment, silence swallowed them. Then, unexpectedly, the officer who had arrived with backup stepped closer, clearing his throat. His voice carried the weight of what everyone felt. "He saved you, Carter. That's a fact. We'll write it down. Doesn't matter if he doesn't want it. The truth doesn't vanish." The words made Thomas flinch. He looked at Megan with a plea in his eyes. "Don't let them turn this into a story. I'm not looking for applause. Just let me walk away. That's all I ask." Megan hesitated, torn between duty and respect. Finally, she nodded once. "All right, but I'll remember. Always." Thomas's breath caught, and for the first time that night, his eyes shimmered with something close to peace. He pressed his forehead briefly against Buddy's fur, as if grounding himself in the only constant he had. The other officers began guiding the crowd away, voices low, the streets slowly emptying. What began as public humiliation ended in reverence. No cheers, no clapping, just silence, the only tribute that mattered. Megan reached out her hand. For a moment, Thomas stared at it, hesitant, then clasped it with a strength that belied his wounds. His grip was rough, scarred, yet steady. "You're not invisible anymore," she said. He nodded faintly. "Maybe for tonight. Tomorrow the city forgets." Megan's voice cracked, but her words were certain. "Not me." With effort, Thomas pushed himself to his feet. Buddy steadied him, loyal as ever. He gave Megan one last look, one last nod, then began to limp down the wet street, vanishing into the mist like he had stepped back into the shadows from which he came. No one stopped him. No one mocked him. They simply watched in silence. And as the night faded, the city itself seemed to whisper the truth. A homeless man mocked in public revealed a shocking truth that silenced everyone. A man discarded by the world performed a heroic act that no one else dared to. And though he asked for nothing in return, his name would remain etched in the heart of the officer whose life he saved. Because sometimes the truest heroes are the ones the world refuses to see. until the night they choose to step forward. The city never spoke his name. By morning, the streets would be washed clean and the story reduced to whispers if told at all. Yet for Officer Megan Carter, the memory would never fade. She had faced death that night, and the one who stood in the way wasn't another officer in uniform, but a homeless man everyone laughed at. What began as a scene of public humiliation ended with a heroic act no one expected. Thomas Reed asked for nothing. No applause, no report, no recognition. He vanished back into the shadows with only his loyal dog beside him. But for Megan, his face, his words, and his sacrifice became a permanent truth. Dignity doesn't wear uniforms, and courage doesn't need a badge. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from those the world refuses to see. And though the crowd fell silent out of shame, Megan carried his name in her heart, forever. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And above all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. And before you go, watch the story I leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.